Hey, Thomas, thank you so much for taking the time.
Not a problem at all. I'm happy to be here and thank you for inviting me.
What really gives you more adrenaline? I need to know. Is it driving a hypercar or winning a YCS?
It's different. I think it has to be the YCS because it lasts for longer. Uh, but the feeling in a YCS is very much emotional, whereas when you're driving something really fast, it's about how it physically affects you, and it's a very different kind of feeling. I certainly prefer winning a YCS.
So most people will know you from Yu-Gi-Oh, winning a YCS maybe even, but as as I contacted you, I actually saw that you're working at a company that produces hypercars, right?
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. It's a company that I almost fell into off the back of my university degree. I did mechanical engineering, and after presenting the project in third year at the headquarters of an external company, I followed their CEO into the kitchen. He was washing up his mug after the meeting, asked if he had any summer work, got a summer placement, and off the back of that, I had a full-time job when I graduated. So yeah, I've found myself deep in the world of high performance automotive engineering, and I'm loving it.
So you're not only a high performer when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh, that's nice. So before we dive actually deep into the topic today, I want to welcome all the viewers here to the Fabled Academy podcast. Actually, it's the 11th episode. And I really, like I said, I'm so stoked to talk to you. I'm super excited that you are. Thank you so much for taking the time, Thomas.
Yeah, not a problem at all. I was excited when you reached out, and since I've seen a couple of the episodes already, it gave me a good excuse to really think back through all of the different things that I've done whilst I was playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And actually going through it sort of year by year, I've realized I already knew there was a lot, but for one, I've been playing for a very long time. And for two, there are so many stories and exciting moments all along the journey. And I'm excited to share some of that with you today.
Perfect. Like I'm so interested in every detail, and also I have to say it's so interesting for me that we get to know each other now because I remember the days back when I was also traveling to YCSs, and there was this Thomas Rose, this very well-known player, which sometimes really gets on top and has this like spice. Let's say it like that we will also talk about today.
Yeah, I certainly liked to play my own thing, and I only really performed at the very best when I was doing something that I had either created myself or at least had a hand in making the deck that it was.
Yeah, definitely. Also, when you search online, there's the Yu-Gi-Oh fandom wiki, right? And you can like really see all the history for people that are interested in looking up the details also from the deck list from back in the days. Shout out definitely to them. But I need to know, like when looking back, you also played like after COVID, and just right off the bat, like if you could change anything about Yu-Gi-Oh today, what would it be?
Ooh, this is tough. There are a small number of big answers here. One of the main ones would be the prize support. And I don't know if I ever published the piece that I wrote about this, but there would be some very easy ways to make the prize support much more rewarding without costing Konami a significant amount. If you just had like alternate art versions of cards with top cut stamps on the card, and you gave those out for premier events, even so, say you got like a top cut stamped Called by the Grave for making top 64, that would be worth so much more than a top cut playmat. And you could produce one card per season, one card per year. The price per card would still be significant, but they would be worth hundreds, whereas a top cut playmat is 50 if you can find a buyer. And the other one's just the end of match procedures. I don't hate them as much as I did when they first came about, but it still leaves a really sour taste. It was remarkable even this weekend seeing in the top four of YCS Birmingham, we saw on stream Din Kabui taking the win in a flurry of turns right at the death of the match. And I saw a lot of commentary afterwards, quite rightly pointing out that Niels could very easily have just slowed down. He was ahead on life for most of those last few turns. And it was remarkable in the community that someone had chosen to not take advantage of that, because the default is that if you're in that situation, you push the limit. You don't slow play, but you don't accelerate to make sure that you get through those turns. And I think it's a real credit to Niels that he made that the fairest match that it could be, and it was such a spectacle to watch on the stream. So I say, yeah, big respect to Niels, and it's sad that that's the exception, not the default, for how a match plays out when it reaches time.
I think the two things that you're bringing up are super important, and I actually am surprised because price support is something that is very, very hardly discussed in the last year, and also something that a lot of the newer TCGs try to tackle a lot. So people like maybe yourself are interested in coming over. We will talk about that later during the podcast, because we will do some time traveling at first and talk about the early days and also like the prime time, so to say, for you. But I want to talk about the second thing that you brought up just here in the beginning, because I think it's something that comes up in a lot of TCGs. And actually at this specific time, I know that in Lorcana was also something very specific going on with the rules, and also in Flesh and Blood at the same time. Players even were making videos about that. And so I'm super stoked to hear your opinion now with the YCS Birmingham, seeing the sportsmanship in YuGiOh, because when I talk to players that leave YuGiOh, one thing that I always bring up is, sometimes the toxic behavior that you were talking about as well, that is also, playing inside of the rules, but making some games really not enjoyable for not even just the players that are watching the game, but of course for the players that are playing in that match. And so I really loved your take here, but maybe you can dive a little bit deeper into that specific moment.
Okay, I think the biggest issue that I have with the current end of match procedures is what happens when an experienced player plays against a player who is newer to the competitive scene. When you have two experienced players at the table, they both understand exactly what's going on, and they will both know and recognize and know what to do if their opponent is playing too slowly. I feel like in Yu-Gi-Oh, people are reluctant to call for a judge, particularly newer competitive players. And that puts the experienced player at more of an advantage than just being good at the game. They should be winning because they play better, not because they understand how to deal with the social situation and the time. That shouldn't be what decides the matches. And I'm worried that it will turn away the players who are trying to make the transition from being an entry-level Premier Event player to potentially becoming at the top of the game. I think there was a big YouTube section quite recently. Team APS maybe did a loss of the mid-core, and I think that the timeout procedures and the reluctance to call for a judge exacerbates that effect, where people who might be in that middle ground between casual and fully competitive, there are extra layers that make it less likely for them to be successful.
I think it's a really crucial part that you are mentioning, because it's not only like the best player is the one who knows the card pool and then also knows how to play in that strategy that is viable in the meta at the moment, but also how to utilize all the rules that are available to them. And in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh, the rule set is so deep that there are so many possibilities, right? But timing and also the end of the match, as you say it, is something that maybe even a game that is sold as Yu-Gi-Oh can work on in the future. But I want to know, like, when really did that come up the first time for yourself? Because you're playing the game for over 10 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was playing at the transition between the old end of match procedures through to the new one. I think it was sometime around 2019-ish that we saw that change, maybe towards the end of 2018. And for me at the time, I was upset by it because it felt like a less fair way of ending the match. I have always felt that it should have been one full additional turn after the end of the turn where time is called. Now, I understand that that still takes significantly longer, but it's much quicker than the old 5 extra turns. The real difference there is that if you play a full additional extra turn, there's an incentive for the current turn player to end their turn as fast as possible, because the non-turn player gets the last action. It also prevents all of the silly scenarios where a game starts with seconds or a minute left on the clock, and the turn player knows that they're the only person who gets to play that game. If there is always one full additional turn in any game that has started, then both players get to play. The player who goes first can still do all of the current nonsense of either gaining or dealing damage on their first turn, but they don't just have to do that. They also have to build a fortress and prevent anything from happening on the crackback. So the silly short game threes become much more interesting. There'll still be an element of time deciding matches, but at least every game is played by both players. I don't think there should ever be a situation where a game can end on turn one with a small amount of life point gain or direct damage.
So we will talk about like this section later on in more detail, what TCGs are today, but you are mentioning some really important parts just up front, and I think that's very interesting also for pro players that are hearing this podcast or watching it on YouTube at the moment. I really want to foster this, like, one aspect of the game that is also called sportsmanship and enjoying the game as well. But I'm curious on your opinion, because I know Flesh and Blood players that are watching this, they know that like Flesh and Blood functions a lot different than Yu-Gi-Oh, because of what you just described. And I want to hear your opinion on that as well, because in Flesh and Blood, when it comes to a game that is similar to a YCS final, for example, the Pro Tour finals, there's really like no time limit that you can have. There's really just, you take the time that you need and whoever is the best player should win. But that also can lead to games being very long, for example, when playing in a fatigue matchup. What is your like just first impressions on this kind of style of playing it out?
I like forcing a time limit. I think that it's necessary for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's a practicality thing. The round has to end, the venue has to close, the staff have to go home. You can't leave it open-ended. I know that for a while there was a third-party series, North America. Can't remember the name of it right now, but it was really popular around 2019-ish. And they had some, in fact, I think it might have been further back than that, because I'm remembering a match with Patrick Hoban playing Monarchs, and that deck had the ability to shuffle cards back from the grave into the deck, and it just kept going. And it was an interesting thing that a match could keep going for that long and that it changes the dynamics, but it ceases to be the excitement that you expect from a decisive game. It's more of an intellectual exercise rather than something which is a spectacle for the viewers. And I do like that the current end of match procedures does make the end very spectacular in every situation where you don't have a player deliberately going slowly.
All right. So we will just leave this part of the conversation as it is right now. I'm very curious on any viewer's opinion or in the comment section as well. But I want to come to the grassroots and really the core of what made you a Yu-Gi-Oh player. And that also like is the beginning of the time travel that we will just go through in this podcast, which will probably be very long, but also very interesting for all the players that were active during the time back then. And also, of course, because the player that you are today, or even the person that you are today, is made of what began the journey. And so I want to hear your story on what really sparked, the joy for you in starting to play Yu-Gi-Oh.
Okay. We're going to have to go back a long way here. We're rolling back 21 years to 2004. I am 9 years old. I'm also the youngest of 4 brothers. So there are 3 older brothers. As the youngest in a family of boys, I am competitive. It is an environment that breeds competition. I was the smallest and the weakest by being the youngest, so anything where I could find a way to win, I enjoyed it. And I would work really hard playing Yu-Gi-Oh against my brothers, particularly my eldest brother, John, who still plays Yu-Gi-Oh to this day, even after I've trailed off from it. But yeah, I remember I got a starter deck Kyber Evolution. We also, around the summer of 2004, we each got 1 collector's tin on holiday, and we played Booster Sealed with our tins. I was a 9-year-old and I was absolutely hardcore jamming my sealed play. Loved that. 2-3 years later, still playing with my oldest brother, I got a Dinosaur's Rage and he got a Machine Revolt structure deck, and we absolutely played them to death. Around this time, I was doing also competitively sailing with my dad and my brothers. So we would travel away on the weekends to sailing tournaments, and I would bring my Yu-Gi-Oh cards and play against my brother in the evening. And yeah, that continued. It got to 2007 when John, who was always the brother who I played with the most, he was the most into cards around this time. He started going to uni then. I didn't have anyone to play against, but he came back from uni. I think it was probably in about his 2nd year, and he had gone to a tournament. I didn't know that there were Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments at this point. This was '09, and he'd gone to a tournament. He didn't have a deck. He borrowed some cards from one of his friends, and they gave him a Flamvel Urakizus from this tournament. This was his souvenir, how I knew that he'd been somewhere, because he isn't the sort who would go out and buy himself cards. And I was like, wow, there are people with so many cards that they're happy to give them away, and they're playing competitively. And I was just hooked by the idea that there might be some higher way of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! I didn't just have to beat my brother. I could go and play against other people and try and beat them too. So in 2010, when he graduated, he moved back home. And around this time, he was unemployed. The job market was pretty weak. He was trying to find somewhere that would hire him. And my parents were keen because he spent a lot of time at home. They were just like, we need to find some hobby for him, something where we can get him out of the house and doing things. So I looked up where you could go and play Yu-Gi-Oh! In Bristol. I didn't actually live in the city, but I found somewhere. It was a little card shop called Area 51, and I forced him to come with me. We had to walk down to the train station, get the train into the city, and then walk for about an hour from the station once we got to the city out to this card shop. And sure enough, luckily, because the post where I found it advertised online was quite old, so it could have just been closed. It could have been a card shop that wasn't even running anymore. But no, we got there and there was a tournament. And so We played in 2010. That was my first ever local tournament. I dragged my brother along, and I was hooked immediately. The format was just after Duelist Revolution. I think people were playing Gladiator Beasts. People were playing Infernity. I can't remember what other decks there were at the time, but those were the two that I specifically remember playing against. And I had brought a stall burn deck. So it was Stealth Birds, Gravity Bind, Level Limit, Grand Mole, Blackwing Gale. It was basically every limited card, and then Jujitsu Masters, Stealth Birds, Penguin Soldiers, anything to try and keep my opponent off the board. Everyone who I played against thought, what is this deck? It wasn't a good deck at the time, but I was so fiercely competitive. I would not give up anything. And I made the top 8 of my first ever locals, and it was we played out the top 8. It was Swiss and then top cut. I won my top 8 match, and then against Infernity in the top 4, I got so completely destroyed. Obviously, I've told you the sorts of cards in my deck. This was the first time I had ever seen a Mistworm, and there's not a lot that you can do against that when you're just setting battle floodgates and set monsters. So I had no chance against that. That was so the locals at the time was run by Ping Zhao, who's going to come up a lot more in the tale of my time playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And the top 4 opponent was James Martin, whose name we'll also hear more of. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. And from then, for pretty much the following 10 years, I played Yu-Gi-Oh! Just about every week. And I would go to as many tournaments as I could. The amount would vary depending on how much time I had, how much money I had. But I spent the following 10 years just thinking, what's my next deck? What's my next tournament? How am I going to win it? And how am I going to get better? And yeah, from there, I guess it rolls on to the following year, 2011, National Championships. This was the first year that the UK Nationals wasn't a qualified event, so it was open entry, and it was in Bristol. What better luck could I possibly have? This was, I am the main character in this story, and they have brought the National Championships to my hometown. I, at this point, was playing Blackwings. Obviously, Blackwings have been a really powerful deck in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! 2011 was not that time. This was the peak of Tengu Plants and the tail end of Six Samurai. There were much bigger contenders. I didn't do very well in the main event. I think I probably went about 5-4. Maybe slightly better, because I think I got the top 128 playmat, which was a Gladiator Beast Esadari playmat that year. So maybe it was 6-3, but I didn't make the top cut. What I did do, though, is I won a Winnermat side event against a guy called Dan Askew, who was quite a good regional player at the time. He was playing Six Samurai, and this was one of those first like golden moments of beating someone who other people had heard of. People were telling me who this person was, and also they were clearly annoyed because they'd just lost to this 16-year-old playing a deck that's been way out of the meta. And maybe that was the first bit that properly got me hooked on playing something different, because it felt all the sweeter when my opponent felt like they shouldn't have lost it, and I show up and I'm like, no, you did. That was good fun for me. And even in that year, we had another big moment like that in Brighton. That was my first YCS. So that was, I think, start of December 2011. Again, lucky that we had an event in the UK because I was 16 years old. I didn't have the money to go anywhere else. And I actually went and slept on the floor of my uncle's study because he lived quite close to Brighton. I couldn't afford to get a hotel. I went there with it would have been James Martin, Ping Zhao, Alec Drinkwater, and a couple of my school friends, George and Mitch. I didn't do too well in the main event there. I think I started off 1 win and 2 losses. And I felt like I'd played badly in some of those losses. So I just dropped at that point because this wasn't just one tournament. There were side events. And if I can't win the main tournament, I'm going to go and find a different tournament that I can win. And I spent the rest of the weekend playing as many side events as I could. I probably won 3 or 4 of them. So winner mats. And this was great because I could win the mat. I could take it to the vendor, sell the mat, and they would pay for me to enter the next one. And I get to keep playing Yu-Gi-Oh! I get to keep trying to beat as many people as possible. It gets to the end of the weekend, and there's a public events playoff for the people with the most points. And I'm sat there like, I've done loads of these. This could be me. They read out 4 names for the playoff. It's not me. And it's not the end of the world. I'm like, well, I've still had a good time. But 10 minutes later, one of the people for the playoff has left the venue. They didn't show up, and it gets passed down to 5th place. Next main character moment, guess who's in 5th? I run over, and I'm so hyped. I'm surrounded by other players who've been grinding these side events. And this is huge for me because there's a prize card on the line here. I didn't get to win anything in the main event, but this is big. This could be huge even for a 16-year-old. And then I play through that public events playoff. I win my first round. I get to the final. This is just top 4. And the player is Weitz Klutenberg, who at the time I think was the Dutch national champion. And he'd also just won it was sort of like a VIP side event where you win flights to the next YCS. So he's just won 2 big events, basically. He's playing Gravekeepers at the time, and I'm still on my Blackwings because I don't have the money to change decks, so I'm just sticking with what I have and what I know. And that was the second big moment of someone who didn't feel like they should have lost, but I found the way to beat them. And not only did I get that sweet nectar of beating someone who was upset about it, but I also had a prize card, and I could sell that prize. Well, I think I did a part sale, part trade. It was a Blood Mephist. And I got so many of the cool high rarity staples that I'd seen all of the fantasy players using. I think I got a super rare Book of Moon, a bottomless trap hole, a handful of other high rare bits that since then have gone massively up in price. Unfortunately, I sold a lot of them sooner than I should have done, but I still got good value from it. And that wasn't even it for that event. Not only did I get that public events playoff, but this was also the YCS that was won by Ping, who had been the leader of the Bristol community that introduced me to the game. And he's now gone on and won the event. And we are both there together, having won a prize card on the same day. And the elation not only of having won something myself, but also having my friend there, sharing in that success. That was I can still remember standing at the station, having both had to buy new train tickets to get home because we missed the trains that we'd planned to take, just waiting for it all to sink in. Yeah, that was one of the biggest moments where I guess the things that had come before then, they were starting to drip feed the excitement, but that YCS was, I am so locked in, and I knew that this was going to be huge for me. Just I've actually had to write down all these bits here because there's too much along the way. We had YCS Sheffield the next year. That was my first YCS top, which I think is partly because I insisted on playing junk decks for a long time, but that was a sealed YCS, so I didn't have the handicap of my own deck. And when I got to play with Battle Pack, I could beat the people that just had the current meta deck. There was no price barrier for me competing, because everyone just has, it was what, 8 or so battle packs to build your deck from. I went to my first overseas YCS in that same year, went to Barcelona. I didn't do very well, but I got to meet a bunch of people. So I met Pat Hoban and a bunch of the guys that had traveled over from America that year, and that was so exciting for me because these were the people that I only knew about from the internet, and I was finally getting a chance to travel and actually say hi to everyone. Like at this point, nobody knows who I am. I'm just a guy. Nobody checks who's winning the public events playoff at a YCS, but it was exciting for me to have an opportunity to see all these people that until that moment only existed online for me. I think at YCS Sheffield in 2012, that was also the first time that I played the GOAT format, which I think it was before GOAT format really took off, but I played probably 20 games in the hotel against Michael Gruner, and I had to play 20 games because that's how long it took me to win a game. He was absolutely battering me, but I just kept saying, can we play again? Can we play again? Can you teach me what I needed to do better? And he was so friendly. He laughed about it a lot, but he was like, sure, yeah, we can go again. And eventually I got my one win and I was like, thank you so much. I need to go to sleep now. But all of these like big Yu-Gi-Oh names making the time for me, I think that just helped me to feel like I was part of the community, even though at this point I wasn't anyone, but I was rubbing shoulders with people who to me were a really big deal. And then the year after that was 2013, and I ended up going to uni in Bath. And for one, it was a really good uni for engineering, but for two, it was where James Martin, the guy who knocked me out of the top 4 in my first ever locals, and Alec Drinkwater, who was one of the people they were both people that I was traveling to these events with. They were both at that uni, and I knew that if I go there, I was going to have them like on the doorstep so that we could travel together to more events, we could practice together. So yeah, I guess Yu-Gi-Oh sort of decided what I was going to do as my choice of university, which in the end it led me on to the job that I have now. So it's all like making your own luck along the way, I guess. The 3 of us went together to YCS Paris in 2014, and I borrowed a deck for this one. I still didn't have loads of cash, but one of my friends, Jamie Wolf, wasn't going to this event, but he had mermails. So I was like, maybe this is my opportunity to play a deck that's more expensive. And I borrowed the deck from him and I practiced with James and Alec, and all 3 of us absolutely smashed that event. I don't know if we all made top cut, but we were all comfortably in day 2. I think James definitely made top cut, and I don't know whether Alec bubbled out or made top as well. But we worked so hard on putting that deck together. I think it was Alec who recognized that Leo, Keeper of the Sacred Tree, was so huge for the Mermail Mirror match, which we felt was the deck to beat. So there are so few outs in the Mermail deck to Leo once you've resolved it. So we mained Dark Hole. It wasn't a particularly good card, but it outed the Leo. And the other thing, then this was Alec's stroke of genius. We played 2. No one else was playing 2 Leo, because the only out that everyone else had to Leo was to summon theirs and crash them. And if they summoned their Leo and you crashed them together, and then you summoned another one, they were just it. I guess it was another one of those moments where not only have you beaten them, but they feel so devastated because they didn't think it was possible. And yeah, that for me is another big memory. That was the first time that I topped a constructed format YCS, and I got to do it there again with my friends. I think that's one of the themes for the most exciting times that I've had in the game, is when I've had success and I've been able to share it with someone. That makes it all the sweeter. After that, I went back to playing Blackwings for a bit, so I didn't get any more results for a while. It actually wasn't until 2016, full 2 years later, that I got my third YCS top, which ended up being my first YCS win. This was right at the end of my time at Bath Uni. Still doing the practice and the theory with James and Alec. They'd graduated. They weren't at the uni anymore, but we were in the group chat. We were planning out everything. They were so high on the ABC deck, as most people were. It was such a good deck. But partly because I like to do something different, and partly because I like to try and beat what people think is best, I had to play something else. And at that moment, it was Burning Abyss for me. I'd already done quite well at some regional level tournaments with the Burning Abyss deck prior to then. And I felt like it could do some good things into ABC. So I fully teched out the deck. I think in my winner's interview, I was saying that it's just a 40 card Burning Abyss deck with 10 side deck cards for ABC already in the main. Because I was playing, it was either 48 or 50. I think it was 50 for that event. And the Chaos Hunters and the Ghost Reapers it gave me so many free games. I played against James the night before the event because he wanted to test ABC. And I was the only person available. And I think I went 9-1 against him in test games. And it was the night before the event. I was like, I'm going to win this event. And it just kept going. And yeah, ended up winning the whole YCS. And again, my friends were there. I had this incredible experience. And looking back, it was, a huge culmination of so many things. It did, though, lead on to the first real, downswing and frustration. Off the back of that, just a few months after Liverpool, they announced the World Championship points playoff. And this was so exciting for me because I'd already won a YCS this season. I had a huge chunk of points. I'd been playing regionals. I'd been doing well. There was no reason why I shouldn't try and push for that qualification slot. This was the earliest form of the points qualification where there was no playoff. It was just the highest points finish from UK, Germany, Italy, and France. So all I needed to do was to beat the other guys in the UK. And the season culminated in me finishing 5-5 at Nationals, getting 0 points and being well and truly out of the race. So it was it was a big come down after the success of Liverpool, but it wasn't game over because I could just go again, right? And I guess this was around the time when you were starting to get into the real competitive circuit. And go again we did. For me, it wasn't immediately. I sort of took a bit of a back seat the following season. So that was the 2017 to 2018 season, which for me, I think was probably my most fun time playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I found what few people will know is my favorite deck of all time. And I played it from October 2017, which was when Destrudo got released, through to May 2018, which is when Ancient Fairy Dragon got banned the day after I won a regional. And throughout that whole time, I was playing basically Ancient Fairy Dragon the deck. It started off just as like a little bit of a gateway entry at YCS London 2017. I was playing Invoked ABC with Destrudo and Emergency Teleport for level 3 tuners. So obviously both Invoked and ABC, hugely powerful field spells. If you start with one of the field spells and a tuner, you can get to the other one, and then the combo swapping between the two with your Ancient Fairy Dragon was absolutely crazy. You could make some silly boards, and the deck just it kept evolving for me as I would try new things. Because during that time, I wasn't just grinding points. I was playing events because I loved them and I loved the deck. I ended up on the silliest and most fun build of that deck, which was a 60 card deck playing Invoked ABC and a Trickstar engine, because it was another engine that used a field spell, had a good level 4 normal summon, and it also had the ability to play the field spell for just an extender. This was around the start of the Link Monster era. So the links are obviously so good with the ABC pieces, and just having the extender meant that you could reliably get an Ancient Fairy Dragon, a light machine, and a light fairy to summon Curious, which would dump snow. I was playing grass as well. So it got to the point where I was playing 60 card ABC Invoked Trickstar with level 3 tuners. It was a grass deck, it was a Fairy Tale Snow deck. And I got to the point where I didn't even want to make my deck better, I wanted to make my deck more fun. So for the very last regional of... Well, I didn't even know at the time it was the very last regional that I was going to get to play with the deck. I swapped out the Abyss Dweller as my utility rank 4 and put in Traptrix Rafflesia, because I loved the ability to play Bottomless Trap Hole and Treacherous Trap Hole. Obviously the Treacherous Trap Hole had been popularized from the Pepe deck before then. That was probably a couple of years before. But I just wanted to play something that no one was expecting. I wanted to use cards that people didn't think were going to be in my deck. And I remember in the penultimate round of the regional in May in Southampton, I was playing against Tim Cox. He was on Spiral. Spiral was a really good deck at the time. I think it's game 3. I've gone first. He's used hand traps. I don't have much of a combo. I just set one back row, and I have some do nothing monster on board. He's got Foolish Goods, I think. Send the Spiral spell, special out drone, and then he's got a normal summon. I think it was a Spiral Tough, and 3 ways to revive his Spiral Tough. It's the equip spell that revives, a monster reborn, and something else. He just summons Tough. And I flip a hard-drawn Bottomless Trap Hole, and he just sits there like, what year is it? He's looking at the tables next to us. This is in game 3. And he's like, can somebody look at this game and just confirm to me that what has happened is actually what I've just seen? Because his Tough got banished, and he shows me his 3 ways to revive Spirals from the grave. And I'm like, it's not in the grave, buddy. And he He's a good friend of mine. He instantly concedes because he knows that he's dead to all the cards that I've added to hand and been stopped on the turn previously. But yeah, that was for me my favorite deck that I've ever played. And I think that season, traveling around, I was still traveling with Alec from locals, still with Ping. He was big in the game at that time, but also with Seb Bloomers and Lewis Tuezieski, all from Bristol. We would drive up to the regionals, have the best time. And then the guys who were coming from other places out on the scene at the time in the UK, so that was Tim Cox, who I just mentioned, JY Sharif, Michael Broadbent and Luke Parks. They were like some of my closest friends who not only was I excited to go and play the tournament, but it would be an opportunity that I'd get to go and see them. I'm sure there are loads of other people that made that season beautiful for me. I can't name everyone because there were so many people that were just a big part of the scene around then. But yeah, that for me was peak Yu-Gi-Oh! And it wasn't actually when I was grinding for points. It wasn't when I was winning YCSs. It was when I was playing a deck that I loved to play, because that made the game so much fun. I was having fun even when I wasn't winning. Anyone has fun when they're winning, but if you've got it in a situation where you just love to play and you can win, that Yu-Gi-Oh! Perfection. I try to think what happened next. That was also a really exciting time because it was when I started getting opportunities to do commentary. Obviously, having started winning events, people were beginning to know who I was. I got a chance for 3 events. I was on the official YuGiOh stream. I did a UK Open. I commentated for a YCS and then later Euros in 2018. So I'm hugely thankful for having the opportunity to do that. I was starting to do some written articles for Card Market. So there was just so many different streams for how I could play my part in the broader Yu-Gi-Oh! Community, not just the people who I was traveling with and seeing at the events. And then off the back of that, I fell back into Burning Abyss around the time that Gouki became really big. And I did not expect to win that Nationals, but I don't think anyone else did either. So that was, yeah, I guess the another big stage opportunity to win in a way where people didn't think I should. And not only was that a special win for being unexpected and people didn't think I should, but also my girlfriend, now wife, was with me that weekend at the tournament. So it was a bit of excitement that I got to share with her as well. So I was there with my friends who'd played the tournament, and she was there. At this point, I'd been signed up to a team, so I probably got some bonus for winning the event as well. That was a special moment for me. Off the back of that, we have another bit of Yu-Gi-Oh! Silliness, where in the off-season after Nationals, this was during the era of LLDS competitions. So for anyone newer, that's Local Legend Duelist Series. This is a 2-tier qualification system where you have the local tier, and the top 2 people from the local tier get to the LLDS Stage 2 event, which is sort of like a small but still high quality event that's only open to the people who've qualified from their local tournaments. And this is even deeper into how do I make people feel like they shouldn't be able to lose to me, but I'm going to make it happen. I played Highlander, not because Highlander is good, but because I wanted a handicap to make the game more exciting for me. So I was playing a Burning Abyss deck with 40 singleton cards, 15 unique extra deck monsters, and 15 unique side deck cards with no duplicates anywhere in the entire 70 cards. It took me like 3 or 4 goes, but I eventually got myself an LLDS qualification playing Highlander. And this is probably about when I should mention my favorite card of all time, which is Orbital Hydralander, who plays a huge part in my favorite combo of all time, Hydralander plus Fairy Tale Snow, which would obviously go on to be a huge part not only in the Nationals win from that year. We're saying that. I don't think I played Hydralander at Nationals. I think my Nationals deck was Rescue Cat to make Naturia Beast. It was only after Nationals, when I was playing the LLDS tournaments, that I fell into Orbital Hydralander. But that card would go on to shape the BA decks that I played throughout the sort of 2018-2019 season, which for me was probably like the competitive highlight. That was when I was doing best at the events. For the first half of that, I was playing a combo BA deck again, just like my previous favorites deck. It was all about summoning Curious. So I played loads of danger monsters, which everyone knows they were great for making Curious, and Curious was just there to dump snow. I was playing the Hydralanders. Eventually it got onto like Distrudo into Yazi for Mare to summon Boral Sword. I played so many different variants of Burning Abyss. Some of them were choosing second in a U-Link format and just playing loads of kaijus. I would do anything that I could to try and find an edge and just be able to play the deck that people thought shouldn't exist. And there were several times throughout that format where I was like, no, it's dead now because this new card has come out or this new deck is popular. And every time, right up until January 2019, when Fairy Tale Snow got banned, I would find a way to make that deck work. And it just, yeah, that was peak Burning Abyss for me. In January 2019, the Fairy Tale Snow ban, that was the death of BA. There was no recovering from that. But I was very lucky because Alec, the guy who I've been traveling around with for almost 10 years at this point, he's read up and he's seen these Orcust cards. And these Orcust cards are going to be like the third big part of this story. He brings the Orcust deck fresh off the release of Orcust Nightmare to a regional in January 2019 when Fairy Tale Snow gets banned, and he tears it up. But because he wasn't as widely known as me, people aren't paying that much attention to what he's doing. But he can't go to the next couple of regionals. So he just hands me the deck. He's like, this is it. This is the deck. And I take his deck to a regional the following weekend. I've barely read the cards, and easiest top. Like, the deck just plays itself. It's insane. So I buy everything for myself as well, so that we each have a copy. And we all go together to YCS Dusseldorf. We've had a couple of months now to fully refine the list. It was perfect. We got the exact list. I think I was playing slightly more cards than them. I was on 48 and a couple of the guys were on like 46 or so, but that deck was so dominant. The events that I've won have been characterized by mediocre play, but a deck that is just so much better than what everyone else is expecting. Just occasionally, when you're trying to build a deck that is going against the grain, you'll stumble across something which is not only against the grain, but it destroys what people think is the best deck. And when those two things come together, you don't have to be the strongest player in the room. You only have to be good enough to not throw it when you've got like a 60-40 advantage going into every match. So I'll never know how like actually good of a Yu-Gi-Oh player I was, but I knew when I had the right deck, and Alec handed me the right deck for that event. So yeah, big shout out to him. The Dream Crusher again, though, as with both of my YCS winning seasons, this was a year that I was trying for the points playoff, and sadly again culminated in a devastating UK National Championships, where this time I finished 6-4, picked up like 10 points out of a possible 128, and I ended up 9th in Europe when it was a top 8 playoff. So yeah, that was another like from the high to the low, and I was pretty frustrated about it. I guess I felt like I had done enough to earn a place in the playoff, and so I was very sad not to have made that, and I think that might have resulted in me sort of completely falling away from Yu-Gi-Oh, because I was on that downswing when 2020 season rolls around, and this was around the time that Legends of Runeterra released, and it was also around the time that COVID stopped all of the in-person events. So we've got a perfect storm of feeling a little bit jaded by a disappointing end to the season, a stop to in-person premiere events, and a new game that I would grow to love coming all at once. And from 2020, I basically didn't play Yu-Gi-Oh for pretty much 2 full years. I didn't get into any of the remote duel YCSs. I didn't really do much when it was like the back to the duel stuff that came along afterwards. I probably played 1 or 2 locals because for me it was exciting that something in person was allowed to happen, but I really didn't feel around that time like I wanted to play competitive Yu-Gi-Oh. And it would be a while before that came back. It was a pretty big hit. I'd gone from being at the top of my game, traveling around, going to all of the events. That would have been around the time that we would have met before. I know that I would always see Ka, Dinka Bui, and Dinkang Pham, Jonas Koschel. So many like top European players were really pushing hard for the events around then. I guess I finally at that point felt like I was up there with the players who'd inspired me early on. So like when I was getting into the game, Joshua Schmidt, because he was the guy back then and he's still the guy now. But back then it was like Michael Gruner, Peter Gross, Pat Hoban. But I finally, I guess I felt like I had hit the top level of the game. But still couldn't convert that to even a playoff slot, which was, it frustrated me. And that I think was basically the hard end to my true, fully competitive era playing Yu-Gi-Oh. We'll get on in a little moment to a bit of a comeback, but for me the comeback wasn't the same. For me it was sort of trying to prove that it wasn't a fluke, and also trying to just be a part of the community. It came around 2011-12 season when Runeterra had fallen out of my interest. I started just going to locals loads, which I hadn't done at all throughout the time where I'd been grinding competitive Yu-Gi-Oh. I didn't have a particularly good deck around this time, but I wanted to build up a local community. So the store in Bristol that's now really successful, Excelsior Games, had a local scene of like 8 guys on a good week. And I started doing a bunch of online promotion for them. I'd post a graphic with the top 8 players every week. So like, here are the players, here are the decks. If you're interested, come down. If you want a deck, message me and I can try and get you some cards to borrow. And over like a couple of years, from 22 to 24, that locals grew from 8 players on a good week to some days it would hit 40 and it would be reliably 30 every single week. So for me, that was like, how can I give something back to this game that had already given so much to me? Which also, it rebuilt my interest in Yu-Gi-Oh! After having felt so jaded. Suddenly there was something to feel good about. It was almost like going full circle. COVID had been a hard reset on everything. I'd had a couple of years playing Runeterra, loved that game until like Bandle City, and then started falling out of love with that. But yeah, this was an opportunity to go back to Yu-Gi-Oh! And sort of do it from the ground up again. It got to summer 22 when Marcus Patel won the European Championships. And he's been a good friend of mine for a long, long time. And I messaged him during day 2. I was like, is this real? Is this deck actually real, or have you just cheesed it? And he's like, no, this is genuine. This deck is the deck. So on that day, I bought all of the plant cards, and that was going to be plants eventually, but that was my last competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And I had a great time with it. We went through, I guess, the 22-23 season. That was big plant gang for me. So that was Marcus Patel, Jess Robinson, Alex Robertson. And it wasn't a deck that I had personally created, but it was a deck that was undiscovered enough that I could do a lot with it. And I actually created a handful of the combos that went on to be like game defining for that deck. Prior to some chats that I had in our theory group, nobody had been doing combos with the graveyard effect of Sunseed Twin. And I found a way that you could use it to do what was the previous standard plant combo, but you just got an extra search for any plant card in the game before you've locked yourself into only summoning plants. So you could do the whole standard combo, but also search Therion Lily and summon Therion Regulus before you were locked out of summoning non-plants. So that blew the whole plant deck wide open. And then obviously Jess goes on to win another EU championship with the plant deck. Huge congrats to her. Marcus, Jess, absolutely smashing it for the UK for the plant deck. In that time, I got a top 16 at a YCS and a top 16 at Nationals. So for me, that was, I guess, validation that what I had before, I could still do. Sorry, I've just been going for too long. Yeah, it was strange. All throughout the times when I'd been performing at my best in Yu-Gi-Oh, I always felt like a little bit of it was just luck. I've never felt like I was the best technical player in the room, but sometimes I could build the right deck. Particularly after winning YCS Liverpool, I didn't top another YCS for at least a couple of years. I was like, I could still top regionals, I could top nationals, but for me, until I guess I got that second event win in 2018, that was when I was like, no, maybe I did actually deserve to win this. And yeah, even after that, I would still wonder sometimes, did I just stumble across the right deck? Was it really? Yeah, imposter syndrome's pretty real. Like you can win a lot of tournaments and still feel like you're not all that.
Yeah.
But I guess being able to come back after COVID, and possibly just that I was a bit older and had a more rounded view of things for me, even though those two events I didn't win, it kind of was a final chapter for me in that I was like, yeah, no, I maybe I did deserve to be here. Maybe those wins were on merit, and I shouldn't look back and feel like they were just luck. And this is gonna feel horrible, I guess, for a bunch of viewers that are like, you won 3 events. How can you still feel like that? But from what I've heard from people that have won even more than me, you can still feel like something's just, maybe it was just luck or whatever. It sometimes never goes away, but I think I finally accepted that I might be good at it, and that feels nice. And then yeah, 2023, I was, as I said, working on trying to grow the local scene in Bristol. But I guess going full circle, coming back, getting some tops, it didn't feel the same. It was almost closing the book rather than getting back into it. I wanted to come back and get event tops. I did, and I wasn't hungry for more. I wasn't nearly as sad when I didn't top. And for me, that was telling, because before COVID, if I went to an event and I didn't make top cut, I'd be upset by it, because all of that work, all of that effort, and to not get something out of it. And I think that's true for a lot of people. Like, if you are a big competitive player and you don't top an event, it can be devastating. Like, you don't get a lot of events, particularly in Europe. So every opportunity that you don't top can hurt. But yeah, after that, my interest kind of waned. I played Chainburn for a little bit because it felt like another deck that I could play that people weren't expecting. Yeah, I did a few region. I topped a regional in 2024 with Chainburn, and that was fun. It should have been 2, but there was a silly judge ruling that cost me one of my top cut finishes. But I was happy to get one. And yeah, that for me was the final. Okay, that was the goal that I set myself. I did it. And now I kind of don't need to play anymore. I think it was a combination. One, I felt like I didn't need to play anymore, and 2, I spent a month working in USA. We went to California for Monterey Car Week. Didn't have any chance to play any cards. And when I got back, that was about when I heard about the new Star Wars card game. Which we'll get onto in separate bit. That doesn't need to be a follow-on to this monologue, but yeah, that August 2024, leaving the UK and not having an opportunity to play Yu-Gi-Oh, that was the end of it for me, I guess.
It is crazy when you think about everything that has happened that led to eventually leaving Yu-Gi-Oh, but then revisiting like all of the important stones that you had along the way. And I think it's very crucial when people will look back even at Yu-Gi-Oh in the future, not only maybe yourself at the experiences that you had, but what influence this game has on the whole generation and how it shifts really after COVID is over for a lot of the people. But there is still a new generation of players enjoying this game and getting into it and being super hyped actually about it, going to YCS and experiencing maybe exactly what you were talking about, the competition, the friendships, the community, traveling around the world, and trying to really be one of the best players out there who make it to the top. And even players who still enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh! As much as you did before COVID can still find joy today. But I think like this whole thing that you're experiencing and now leading up to, basically going into your 30s is shaping the person that you've become. And also it's kind of funny that there are still other possibilities playing other games maybe in the future that we will also talk about in the near minutes. But I want to revisit some key points here that I'm really interested in hearing a little bit more about. But definitely, like you talked about it, like scratching on the world championship for Yu-Gi-Oh, and that is really like a part that you kind of, it's like an untapped thing. Would a Magic player maybe say in this instant here for yourself, looking back at Yu-Gi-Oh too? But you found a way to really manage and see it from a bright light. But when you imagine yourself going like 5 or 10 years forward in the future, will it still be a bummer, or will you think like you just described it? What do you think is really the emotions that you will keep traveling forward?
It's already fine. For a long time it wasn't. For a long time I was upset that I didn't get an opportunity to go to Worlds, but perhaps it's been helped by hearing stories from people who've been to Worlds and not won. They still feel like they didn't make it, even though they got to the tournament. So I don't know. Maybe I could have got to Worlds. Maybe I could have had a tournament of it. But I probably would feel not so different to how I am now if I had gone there and not won, because there's always another step that you could have got to. There's always but maybe that as well. For a long time, I was sad that I still to this day have never topped a European Championship. I came close a couple of times. I've played 6 European Championships, and I have never once made the top cut at any of them. But it's fine. I won other stuff. And now I see it much more from the perspective of the things that did go well rather than the bits that didn't. I'm really proud of everything that I did achieve in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I don't feel like I need to have more for it to be a record that's worth being proud of.
And also, when you think back about it, how was it really that you were viewing these tournaments, like the European Championship and the World Championship specifically? Because the World Championship definitely is something that only a few people in Yu-Gi-Oh! Can ever experience. And so it's really like that stairway to heaven, right? That a lot of people try to climb. And what did you view the World Championship back then when you were in the mood of like, I want to get to that accomplishment in Yu-Gi-Oh?
I guess for me, it was the ultimate tournament for how I play. It's a format that no one knows, so you have to be able to craft your own deck. And whilst I do now believe that I am a good player, I have only ever been great at building decks. So I guess I wanted the opportunity to try being on that stage because perhaps it plays into my strengths, but yeah, it was an aspiration, and now it's an aspiration that I missed, and I've made peace with that.
It's also, when looking from it from an outside view now, like it's years that you really try to accomplish that goal. And also now that you are like kind of even looking at Yu-Gi-Oh from the outside perspective, not even playing it actively anymore like you did, how do you view the World Championship now? Because you already mentioned it, there are other games that you're interested in. Star Wars Unlimited, you mentioned it already. And there are also other games that try to give the World Championship a little bit of a different feel like Yu-Gi-Oh does it. Magic for sure is something not as elite as Yu-Gi-Oh when it comes to the amount of people who can enter in the World Championship. But Flesh and Blood, for example, there are so many people who can just try and get into the World Championship. There are over 300 players who can just attend the event. And how do you view like the World Championship in Yu-Gi-Oh compared to these other TCGs today?
I think the World Championship for Yu-Gi-Oh is very much aligned with how Yu-Gi-Oh is as a premier event game. It is hugely prestigious. In the same way that making the top cut of a Yu-Gi-Oh event is such a small proportion of the entrance, because we get huge events now. Getting to Worlds, just making it there, you have to be absolutely amongst the best of the best. And similarly to the rest of Yu-Gi-Oh, you don't really get rewarded for making it. It's frustrating for the people that go there and they don't get much for having achieved all of that. I think being more interested now in other games makes me perhaps think less in some ways of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship, not from the perspective of achieving a qualification for it or the players who do, but I feel like Konami could do a better job of making it as rewarding as it is prestigious. There's a definite imbalance there, and seeing it from the perspective of other games has certainly helped me to be less upset that I didn't get the chance to be on that stage.
And I think we are talking about this era now where we have so many different TCGs available for all us players out there. But back then, really, when you started, you mentioned like that driveway that you just got onto, and then you just full blown on Yu-Gi-Oh. So how did you really look at like games back then when you started? Was it like, okay, there's Magic the Gathering, maybe that's something for me too? Maybe also dive into Pokemon, or was it really just like you described in the last hour? It was like this full blown Yu-Gi-Oh lifestyle.
I collected Pokemon cards for a year or two when I was maybe 13 years old. Like I would have a paper round. I made 20 quid a week and I would just buy booster packs. I earned money to buy booster packs. I didn't play the game. I just wanted the cards. But I knew how to play the game, and I knew that the game wasn't as good as Yu-Gi-Oh! I still to this day believe that the Pokemon TCG is just not that great of a game. And with Magic, I didn't know much about the game, but it felt like Yu-Gi-Oh! Was the game for teenagers and Magic was the game for people 10 years older than me. None of my friends played Magic, so I played the game that my friends played, and I never considered anything else because I never had a reason to. I had a game that I enjoyed, a game that my friends played, a game that I owned the cards for, and because my friends played, I had people to travel to events with. There was never any reason for me to look elsewhere, I guess, right up until 2019 when I had my second round of disappointment with the world's points and seeing Runeterra and hitting COVID all at once. That was a sort of an upheaval sufficient enough to make me look elsewhere.
You you are also describing like I think what a lot of um, us players that got into Yu-Gi-Oh had when being like actually like on the rise, really, right? You're discovering life in general, and then there is this game that you can really share the passion with not only your friends that you make on a local level, but you can go out and meet other people from other countries. You can maybe even try and meet people from like the US. Maybe even if you go to the World Championship, in the case of Yu-Gi-Oh, it will be from all around the world. But these days, when I'm looking not only on my life, but also looking at what you are doing in your life, things have really shifted, right? There's not really the same surroundings that we have when we were younger. And so I think that also plays a big role in it, right?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. At the time that I was traveling for Yu-Gi-Oh, that was the only option that I had for traveling because it was something where I had people to go with. We would split accommodation to make things cost less. So it was an affordable way to have an exciting experience traveling, seeing those people. Now I travel sometimes with work. I can travel completely for whatever reason I want to. I go places with my wife and I have I have the ability to pick my holidays when I want holidays rather than only being able to travel for tournaments, which yeah, I I don't know whether I would still have been as dedicated to traveling for Yu-Gi-Oh if I'd had opportunities outside of that, but I think at the time I was just so much more competitive that I probably still would have.
Yeah, definitely. Like all the way when you told all the stories, like we can really see not only from the stories, but also from the emotions that you have while telling those stories, that competing is something that lies at the bottom of your heart, and I think that is still something very important to your person. So, um, talking about the accommodation that you were talking about, also for the World Championship, um, what role really do you think was it back then? Because you described those moments when you won your first prize card, when you come to that edge that you were searching for, and then holding that prestigious prize in your hand, and now comparing it to what you were describing, like players coming to the World Championship, maybe being adults too, so having a little bit of a different view maybe on the pricing as yeah maybe a teenager has. And so what do you yeah now looking back at it and reviewing it would say to the price support?
Uh, I think possibly the prize support was correct when YCSs first started. The events were smaller. The cost of the game was actually quite reasonable around the time when I started playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Um, and I think that the demand for things like YCS Top Cut playmats was higher. Um, but since in the years since then, the value of the playmats has decreased. The cost of attending the events has increased. The cost of registering for the events has increased. Um, yeah, it's tough because I'm sure that YCSs are loss making for Konami. They aren't running them because they make a profit. They're running them because providing a competitive environment is important for the health of the game. Uh, yeah, it comes back to what I was saying earlier. I think that they don't need to spend more money. They just need to create value by giving using the game as a source of value, giving alternate art prize cards, giving people things that are cheap to manufacture, but have value to the people that win them. I hear all the time people are upset about, oh, there's this prize that only cost them, what, cents or a dollar to make. It doesn't matter what it costs them to make. What matters is whether it has value to the person that wins it. And that can either be because you're giving something that that person actually wants, or you're giving them something that the secondary market will determine is valuable. And playmats aren't it.
Yeah, definitely. And air fryers and switches doesn't do the job as well. But when when I look at what you described when you first hold that Blood Mephist, um, can you go back to that moment and like describe what really just asking you brings it up. It's like so perfectly describing, I think, for every competitor out there, but really go back to that moment and describe it in a little bit more detail.
Well, I got it in like a picture frame. It had it was between when they had like the screw down cases, and afterwards they just gave you the raw card, which was terrifying. But yeah, it was in a picture frame, and I got this card, and Ping also had one in a picture frame as well. And I think even just putting it in a frame, it makes it feel more valuable. Like this isn't a card, this is a prize card. But at the time, I don't think I would have cared if it wasn't valuable, because I hadn't won anything like that prior. For me, the moment of having won and having got the prize card was completely separate from the moment of being able to sell it or trade it and get value from it. It was also quite a valuable card, much more so than a lot of the prize cards that followed it. I know that there were lots of rumors about prize cards being leaked that shouldn't have been in circulation. And so the value of the cards that followed, the Dvorak, Ascension Sky Dragon, and Giant Hand, which suffered less because it was playable, those cards were a fraction of the price of Blood Mephist. When the prize cards are worth a lot, I think that does definitely make a big difference. And Blood Mephist was, in my view, the perfect prize card, because they successfully limited the supply, so they were in demand. They printed a card that was borderline playable but not game breaking. In fact, no, Giant Hand is also a good example of a prize card, because even though it did see play and people who had them raved about how good the card was, it wasn't actually that good. Minerva was a terrible prize card because it was that good, and that should never have been allowed to happen. And I think they backpedaled too hard after. I say that the Chaos Emperor Armageddon was also too good. Minerva and Chaos Emperor too strong. They've looped back to the early days of prize cards, which were way too strong. Mephist and Giant Hand, if they could make prize cards on that kind of level, where people think they're really good but they're actually just okay, I think that's a sweet spot. And if they could make them somehow more accessible, so like if you go to a YCS and everyone in the top 64 gets a prize card, but first place gets a prize card it's ultra rare, like that is by itself a big distinguishing factor. Or you could put like a little champion stamp on it, let people know that this is the real deal, this is the YCS Champion card. But they're already printing the prize cards. You can't make a valuable prize card by printing 60 copies of Another Verse whatever, because nobody cares. If you make it as a playable card that's either maybe it's a unique card but probably better if it's just an alternate art, then you're giving away something that there's actually a market for. And I think that's really important, I hope that they will do another big change to how they do prize cards and make YCSs worthwhile for people again.
So when we're traveling away from Yu-Gi-Oh and looking at other games, what are you really looking to have in a game? Is it, of course, not having the time as you had them when studying, but is it still like that you're looking at pricing and the competitive environment, or is it at first another thing that you're looking at when considering another game?
This is interesting because off the back of my month working in America, that was when I decided that I wanted to try a different card game. And with some of my friends who were also interested in moving to a different card game, we actually looked at lots of different games that were out there. So we had a short list, we had evaluation criteria. The pricing wasn't a big deal. So at the time, Star Wars didn't have premiere events. We didn't even have like regional level events. We were just basing it off what the game was like to play. So there were the factors that we considered the most significant were the price to play, because regardless of whether or not you're winning, you still have to pay to play. The gameplay, so how enjoyable is it, and sort of separately to how enjoyable it is it, because it is a separate thing, how good is it? And for us, how good is it is about being simple and deep. So low complexity and high depth. Because it's easy to make a game that is very good for competitive by making it really complicated, like Yu-Gi-Oh! But if you can find a game that is really good for competitive play, but also very easy to understand, that makes it... I guess maybe chess is the ultimate game that is good, but for me it's not fun. It's good because all of the pieces do one thing. The rule set is very simple, but there's more depth than I could possibly understand. But you need a game that is good and fun. And then it needs to be cheap. It needs to be supported in the UK. It needs to have local tournament stores. It needs to have or soon to have competitive events. And we knew that there was a plan for Star Wars to have those events. We just didn't know what they were yet. So we didn't know what the pricing was going to be, but the prizes weren't a huge deal. And in fact, I probably wouldn't have left Yu-Gi-Oh! If the price to play wasn't high. It was around the time of Mulcharmies that I had enough. I saw those, and previously when an expensive staple had come out, I'd bought it, and this time I looked at them and I was like, it's a lot of money, and I'm not really taking the game that seriously. I don't think I want to pay that much for staple cards. So, I didn't. And I looked for a game that I could get into that didn't cost as much.
So when you are looking at the cost to compete, that is actually, I think, for a lot of people, a question that they're asking themselves whether they want to play even at TCG or try it out. How did your view on the cost to compete change? Because back then, when you were starting out, you described how you were really only able to play one deck, the deck that you had or the one that you had access to, depending on the friends that you had at the moment. But now that you are an adult, you have a job, it's much easier, right? To just go out and say like, you know what, I basically can play every deck that I want if I really want to, but I can decide whether I really want to play it or not. And so maybe you can talk around that mind shift and also the view that you have on the price to compete in TCGs.
Yeah. I don't think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is crazy expensive. It's just more than I want to pay right now. I mentioned a bit that my interest had fallen away and I lost some of the competitive drive that I had, uh, which is partly because the game continues to get more and more complex over the years. And I don't have as much time to play as I used to. So the ratio of work to fun involved in being a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player for me isn't good anymore, because if the amount of work there is in Yu-Gi-Oh is proportional to the number of sets released, every time a set comes out, you have to read the new cards, you have to understand the new cards. And that is work. That's not fun. It's only fun once you've done all of the work and you're then competing at the top level with that information already obtained. So, yeah, given that I didn't know how much I was going to be able to play. Obviously, I'm married. I've been renovating a home. I'm busy with work. Sometimes I can't play for a month. Sometimes I can't play for 2 months. I didn't want a game where I had to pay hundreds to own cards, to do work, to have a chance to play. If Yu-Gi-Oh was a game where you could pay the money, own the cards, go to the tournament and compete, I would still play it. But given the combination of work and price, that's what really turned me off, because there was a significant chance that I would pay the money, not have time to do the work, and then the cards get reprinted and I've lost the money without getting any payoff. So I looked for a game that I could buy into for less, because it meant that even if I didn't get as much payoff, I hadn't lost anything.
And when you're talking about reprints, it's of course like coming from Yu-Gi-Oh! We don't need to tell the Yu-Gi-Oh! Players how reprints work in Yu-Gi-Oh! But games are taking different approaches these days to reprints. And so I want to hear your opinion on, like, how do you think a game should handle reprints, and what would you expect even from a TCG, maybe even going into Star Wars Unlimited now, to have cards being reprinted or at least being available?
I don't know. Yu-Gi-Oh! Looking back at Yu-Gi-Oh! From Star Wars, I wonder how anyone ever put up with it. Like, you would pay 200 for a playset of the Chase Secret Rare, and a year later, that card would be worth 20 each, maybe less. So your 200 is now 50, and that is quite literally the price that you must pay to compete. And decks can be up to 1,000. Like, 1,000's an expensive Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Most of them are probably 500, but it's 500 that decays. So the continuing price to compete in Yu-Gi-Oh is only worthwhile if you play a lot, which is kind of fine, because Yu-Gi-Oh is so complex that you'll only buy into the top level if you're planning to play a lot anyway, or it's not worth it from an enjoyment perspective either. So I guess the reprint cadence for Yu-Gi-Oh makes sense in the context of Yu-Gi-Oh as a competitive game. But having gone from there to Star Wars, where the most expensive deck is like 200 quid, and you can buy the best tier 1 decks for 120, 150. Like, I literally bought the entire best deck for £150 when I started playing Star Wars. That was the first deck that I owned. And yeah, it had everything. It was main deck, side deck, some options of cards that I could swap in. The difference, I guess, in Star Wars is that it's a game with set rotation. So cards are only legal for 16 months to 2 years at the most. So 16 to 24 months is the lifespan of any given card. But right now, the most expensive cards are like 30, 35 quid. And the most expensive decks, as I was saying, 200. So for me, that's an amount where rather than buying a playset of Mulch Army, I am buying the entire deck. And the prices are pretty stable. And it's... Yeah, I'm not sure whether that is the entirety of it. I think for me, the reason why I'm so much more excited about Star Wars is that the ratio of work to fun is so much better. You can play that game by knowing how the game works, which in itself is very simple, rather than having to know how every card works. And in Yu-Gi-Oh, the cards, not only do you have to know how they all work, but they're all much more complicated, and the rules are much more complicated. So, yeah, it just suits my life better now, and I'm happy for that change. Sorry, I've meandered a lot there, and I can't remember what the actual question was.
So
it was about reprints, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think with Star Wars, as you were talking about it, is like that Star Wars didn't see really much a reprint set or something like One Piece, for example, just recently had. But when going forward and you may invest your time more deeply into Star Wars Unlimited, there for sure must be a time where some case of reprints will happen. But as far as I've understood it, like there is no real need yet to make a reprint set or even reprint like cards that are already available in the market, because there is just a price barrier to entry that is like very reasonable.
Yeah, the cards are all cheap. They are only ever legal for a maximum of 2 years. So if a card gets really old, it's not in the Premier format anymore anyway. So you'll never get the issues of ancient cards not being available because it just doesn't matter. The reprinting that they've done so far is they did a rerun of the first booster set because they sold out the first time. But it doesn't need reprints, so they don't reprint stuff.
So I'm very curious, like you talked about that list and the comparisons that you did with your friends looking at the TCG market today. And I know a lot of the viewers on my channel are coming from Flesh and Blood. So was Flesh and Blood an option for you? Did you look into it?
Flesh and Blood was not only an option, it made the short list for the ones that we were like genuinely seriously considering. To this day, I haven't actually played the game because it suffered on some categories that made us write it off, which was that the cost to buy in for competitive top level play was far too high. Like the legendary cards, some of the equipments, and some of the staples. I think given the nature of the game and the eternal card pool, the reluctance to use bans and the presence of staples, it just means that the cost to play an optimal deck, which is what I and my friends would want to do if we played any card game, is just way too high. And that problem is twofold. That it's firstly because we didn't want to, because we have less time available, and you never know, is the amount of money that I'm putting in worth it for how much time I'm going to get to play? But also because any game that I play, I want to be good enough that I would recommend it to other people, and I couldn't recommend other people to join Flesh and Blood from a competitive perspective because the buy-in cost is so high.
And so you were looking at Flesh and Blood, and how did you really determine then, like for yourself being outside of the game, how much money you need to compete? Did you just look at deck lists from recent like World Championship or Pro Tours, or what did you do to find out?
There's a lot of content on YouTube from people doing like pros and cons for different card games. So I watched videos on like basic gameplay mechanics, how to get into Flesh and Blood, should you play Flesh and Blood, all that sort of thing. There's loads of people saying this is why it's good, this is why it's bad. And the price to buy in was pretty high on our list of reasons that we would or wouldn't play a card game. The other thing that it suffered a bit on is it's quite complex. It's very good for competitive play, but the new player experience isn't great because there's a lot that you just need to know. There's a lot of rules that can feel kind of gotcha if you aren't fully familiar with the game yet. And Star Wars doesn't have that. Like the basic rules of the game are so simple.
And I remember like talking to Kang, for example. He was the one deciding to go to Lorcana, right?
Yeah.
And of course, like there are some mechanics that are similar when looking at Star Wars Unlimited, but Star Wars Unlimited is a really different game when looking at it as a whole. But how did you look at Lorcana then, with even Kang deciding to go full force on it?
Lorcana was our second choice. It finished second in the ranking of the shortlist. If Star Wars didn't exist, I would play Lorcana. It's worse in a few categories. It's more expensive. And the gameplay isn't as fun. Nor do I think it's as deep. I think they're actually worse in both the enjoyment and the ability to be better. The alternate actions, turn sequencing, similar to Legends of Runeterra, is one of my favorite aspects of Star Wars. Because it's a way of bringing in ability to be good at the game without adding any complexity. Everyone understands how it works. I do a thing, you do a thing. It's mechanically as simple as you can get for adding depth.
So it's interesting that you told the whole story of how you got into Yu-Gi-Oh! And then all the drive that you have, and now you're in a very different spot, right? Not only when it comes to the time that you have, but also the money that you want to spend on it. And I want to really come to the point where it's like just the way that you go out and look at decks and how you evaluate if you want to spend the money on it is like far different from what you used to back in the like 10 high competitive years that you had in Yu-Gi-Oh! I also remember the times where like it was clear that you are buying the next competitive high tier deck, right? You just need the cards. It's just a normal thing. And now it's like a very different spot to be in. And I know that some people out there are still in that cycle. And what was it really for you that when you're looking at decks, maybe even when you're looking at Flesh and Blood and see like the price tag of $1,500 to buy into a deck, why is it not reasonable anymore for you to really spend the money on it, even though you have the money much more available nowadays than you used to back in the days?
It's just a matter of time. If I had as much time to play now as I did when I was playing top competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Like there was a year in the 2018-19 season when in 52 weeks I did 41 events. If I was playing that much now, the price would be kind of irrelevant, particularly when you look at Flesh and Blood, where it's a high buy-in cost, but it's not a high recurring cost. I guess the only thing that is still really relevant, even if I did have the time available, is one of the things we were considering is it a game that we would recommend to our friends? And not everyone has that money available. You can't recommend a game that costs $1,000 to someone who doesn't have $1,000.
Yeah, it's a big thing that you are also talking about, like not only the view that you have for yourself, but also the players that you want to play the game with, right? Because that's ultimately what the fun will be about when you are driving to Star Wars Unlimited tournaments in the future, for example, maybe grinding even for a bigger tournament that might come in the future. It's not the perspective only on yourself, but the group of players you want to interact with. But when looking at Star Wars Unlimited, like what is it really that makes you excited about the future playing in that game?
The tournament prizes are really good. I think the gameplay is excellent. For now, the price is really low. It's fun. I enjoy physically just playing the game. Like obviously, I love winning, and it's nice that it's a game that I can do well at. But the game itself is really fun. I struggle to find things that I don't like about the game. I think maybe the art style on the cards not fantastic, but that's not a big deal to me. Yeah, there's not a lot. There is not a lot to not like, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And when you're looking at Star Wars and the possibility to also travel for Star Wars, how are you like evaluating how much time you want to spend in it in the future besides all the stuff that you have already going on in your life?
If I can win events or win prizes that make it cost nothing to go places, why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
I won a regional, and the prizes that I got from that regional were enough to cover my flights to Vegas for the Galactic Championship, which is like their big end of season event. So anytime where I can play events that pay for themselves and travel to places that pay for themselves, of course I'm going to do that. Like, yeah. Not only am I going to do that because it's great value, but I can play that event. I can use the prizes to pay for my flight to go to the next event. And I can use the money that I could have paid for myself to go to buy a ticket for my wife to come with me. So we get to go and see this new place. The game will subsidize it. And I guess I get to continue that cycle with... I've never traveled to America for YuGiOh because I would have had to pay for that off my own back. Even if you win a YCS and you get free travel to an event, that's only on your continent. So winning a regional and being able to convert that into an intercontinental flight, yeah, that's huge for me.
Yeah. So you touched on specific events happening in Star Wars Unlimited already, but how did it really start that you pivoted your time into the game then? Because I remember seeing the post on your Facebook page. I think you even mentioned Star Wars being like the best game that you tried so far.
Yeah, it's the best card game I have ever played. Which makes it really easy to focus on, because if I'd tried it and it had been cheaper than YuGiOh but not as fun, or if it had been cheaper than YuGiOh but not as good competitively, or if it had had good prizing but there was some other aspect that was like, oh, that kind of sucks. But as soon as you try it and you're like, no, this is kind of just better in every way, there's no question. Like I thought when I first played Star Wars that I might still attend YuGiOh events afterwards, because I don't know, I've done it for a long time. YuGiOh's fun. Like YuGiOh is a great game, and more power to the people who continue to love it, because it is a really good game and it continues to be a very good game. I just don't think it's the best one. And it took me really looking at the other options to realize that the other ones might just be better. It's so old. Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Magic, they are 25 years old or more. And just in the same way that people get better at making cars, making computers, People get better at making games. It would be insane to think that the best TCG made 25 years ago could be as good as the best TCG made now, because we've got an extra 25 years worth of game design knowledge. People have learned in that time what makes games fun and what makes games not fun. They avoid the pitfalls and they get more of the big hitters in.
Yeah. So when you're imagining yourself going like 5 or 10 years forward, you are dabbling into Star Wars Unlimited now, but how do you imagine the TCG environment evolving with all these TCGs that are out now and that also need to prove themselves, right?
It's free market. The good ones will survive and the ones that aren't as good will die. There is plenty of ways that card games that are mechanically good can lose out to economic factors or mismanagement. So I'm not banking on Star Wars continuing to be successful. If it stopped being successful, I would play a different game. That might be Lorcana. That might even be YuGiOh if something changed and I had more time to commit to it. But yeah, I'll just play whatever feels like the best game at the time.
Yeah. For YuGiOh specifically, I'm interested to hear your opinion, because Time Wizard is a thing today too, and who knows what other formats we will like get to try out at these bigger events in YuGiOh. Is that a thing that you are considering doing in the future, or maybe even have on your list at the moment?
I have a Time Wizard deck. I like it much more than constructed YuGiOh because the work to fun ratio is so much better. You only have to do the work once for Time Wizard, and even though people change their deck lists a little bit, the card pool stays the same. So you never have a new set that comes out where you have to read everything, learn all the combos and everything. I can have a Time Wizard deck that I take with me, and if anyone wants to play, yeah, I'll play it because I know what your cards do. That's fine, that's fun. The price is low. The cards can't really depreciate because they didn't cost anything to start with, so it doesn't matter if I only play one game of Time Wizard a year. I've paid my £50 to own a Time Wizard deck, and I'll probably just own it forever. So that's Edison. I don't play any of the other ones currently, but if other formats in Time Wizard got popular and were cheap, I would probably pay 50 quid and have a deck for them, because the buy-in price is insignificant in adult money. It won't go down, and the fun is there. So I like it. It's still not as good as Star Wars, and it doesn't have premier events. It doesn't have the prestige of here is the big event that is the headline for the game. So I wouldn't travel to a YCS to play Time Wizard because the prestige isn't there, and that is still important for me. But I enjoy it, and I enjoy it a lot more than the effort of playing modern Yu-Gi-Oh!
I think one part of playing TCGs, when we're talking about the possibility that you are going to tournaments in the future, is also not only the constructed format, but also the limited side of things. And I found it very, very funny that you are talking about a limited YCS. Actually, it was, for me, unheard of, actually. I didn't really knew that that was a thing. And how do you view going to other games now, specifically in Star Wars Unlimited 2, the possibility to draft and play sealed?
I love limited formats. I guess we've brushed on a couple of times that I'm not the best player in the room. No. I am a good player, but I'm a better deck builder. Limited formats are perfect for me because everyone has the same going in point. Nobody has a power level advantage in playing the best deck. Everyone has to, in that moment, build the best deck that they can with the cards available. So that can be drafting them, that can just be in sealed. I much prefer draft over sealed because that brings in evaluation of the card in the live situation rather than just what did you open. But yeah, a game that is designed to have the possibility to play draft, and there are already draft events at Star Wars tournaments, and I'm hopeful that there might be draft premiere events. I would love to see that.
Yeah, that would be my follow-up question. Like in Star Wars Unlimited, I actually don't have a clue about the tournament system. I just know that they have like this galactic tournament system, the regional thing, right? And so there's no possibility yet that regionals are draft format only, right?
There are draft side events at the premier events, but they haven't yet created any draft format like main events. But that could change.
Yeah.
And the product is set up so that the booster packs work excellently for draft. So it would be very easy to make that the case.
So I found it interesting because draft was something very new to me. Like I've never played draft or sealed when I was in Yu-Gi-Oh! I didn't even know the existence of the possibility to play something like that. And so when I entered Flesh and Blood and I discovered draft, it was something very magical for me too, because you described the like pros of that format perfectly. There is like an even play field, right? For players that don't have the money or that don't want to spend the money. But also there is like an ecosystem that you are working in, right? There's the limitation of the card pool. So it's not really the 10,000 cards that you need to know, but the 200 cards or something like that you really can dive into and take the amount of time that you want to spend on it. And when looking at the evaluation that you did with your friends on which trading card game you want to dive into, was like the limited format something that you looked at when deciding on the game?
I don't think it was, which is surprising because we love limited format. We have maintained since 2012 a Yu-Gi-Oh! Cube. So we've played draft Yu-Gi-Oh! Throughout most of the time that we've played Yu-Gi-Oh! And even when we've lost players who, before I did, decided that competitive wasn't for them anymore, they've continued to play draft with us just socially. I guess from that perspective, you can make a cube in any game. So whether or not it natively supports draft doesn't matter that much because we can make our own draft. The fact that Star Wars does natively support draft is just an extra bonus. Like we do booster draft like once a month with Star Wars. Last weekend I was at YCS Liverpool because it's close to where I live. Sorry, not live. YCS Birmingham because it's close to where I live. I went up only on the Sunday to go and see some friends, people that I only see at YCS's, chatted to loads of people, and played a Star Wars draft with some friends. Like, it's good.
So when looking at you traveling to YCS Birmingham and also considering to play the game in the future, how do you look like playing multiple TCGs actually in the life that you have today?
Why would I? The amount of time that I have available to play TCGs is fixed. Whether it's big or small, it is a fixed amount. The amount of effort required to play TCGs competitive is dependent on the number of games that you do. So it comes back to the work to fun ratio. If you do one game, you have one bit of work and the rest is all fun. If you do two games, you have to do 2 bits of work, and the amount of time that's left for fun is smaller because you've spent at least twice as long doing the work.
Exactly. I think that's a very interesting point, because I also talk to players who play on a professional level that they like earn their living with these trading card games. And so for those players, playing like multiple TCGs is an option. But I think it's very interesting now that you bring this like view in that like playing multiple TCGs is not really a thing ever to consider when having other things to carry on. I mean with work stuff, right? And so how do you view like the possibility of players being able to earn their living off of TCGs? Because I know you described like the long passion that you had competing 10 years in Yu-Gi-Oh! And so would the possibility exist in Yu-Gi-Oh! To do that? Do you think you would have pursued it?
If it had been possible when I was playing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! To make a living from tournament performance, I would have tried to, and it would have made me hate the game. Because my life would have been, the quality of my life would have been dependent on how I performed. And that would have made the losses so much more devastating. For me, I like that the card games are a hobby. I like that when I win, I get to feel good about winning, but I don't need my salary to be dependent on that as well. I already feel good when I win, and I already feel bad when I lose. But if I have a job that provides me with an income every month, it doesn't affect whether or not I can pay my mortgage, the fact that I've won or lost.
Yeah. I think that's a very like interesting part for also Flesh and Blood players to think about. Because in Flesh and Blood also we have prize money, and so the question sometimes comes up like, when is playing a TCG maybe even going towards like gambling a little bit, or even being reliant on like that money that you win? Of course, like it can be something nice. We talked about the positive things of pricing already, but I I just can be like I just can be on your side here actually, because I also work a regular job and I play TCGs for the fun. But I know that out there players are who also play for the prize money, and that's totally okay. That's totally fair. But I also saw like the players already who like can go down that road and suffer mentally, how you described it as well. And I think that's something very dangerous that can happen while being in a hobby that can provide so much joy. Like we already described, like meeting new people, traveling the world, having to experience a competitive environment and stuff like that. So when we round up the podcast here, and you are looking at all the past experiences that you had and all the things that are lying in front of you, what is really the one thing that you think that you will remember forever? Competing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or also when it comes to Star Wars Unlimited, you may choose.
It'll be when I win the Galactic Championship for Star Wars Unlimited. I can't guarantee that, and it's a hobby and it's a fun hobby. I think looking at the things that have already happened, it's probably the regional that I won the day before the Ancient Fairy Dragon ban got announced, because that for me was the peak deck that I loved to play. The stakes were low, and it was such a fun day. And coming back to the would I have gone pro? Yeah, I would have tried to, but I never would have played that deck because it wasn't a meta deck. It wasn't a competitive deck. I never would have had that experience if my livelihood depended on the result of that tournament.
That's something I think that today, when players are competing in these TCGs, just that feeling that you described, playing an off-meta deck, are forgetting sometimes, when also maybe even, like I have to say, I am someone like that. I'm not a good deck constructor and constructed, so I net deck when I want to play constructed. And so it's a very different approach. And I think that's something so unique and so interesting also for all the viewers who are still on to take maybe to the next tournament on the local level, or maybe even if it's a Flesh and Blood player who wants to compete in the Pro Tour in London, actually, that is coming up in a few months, thought that someone can take with and get something out of, definitely. So here at the end, Thomas, is there, you gave so many shout outs actually during the podcast already, but is there a shout out that you want to make here in the end?
There are so many people that I'd love to shout out, and I'm not going to be able to get through anyone. So please don't be upset if I've missed you. The shout outs have to be to the people who I've traveled with throughout the years that I've played Yu-Gi-Oh. So Alec, James, Dan, Mitch, Lewis, Seb, Ping, and Alex. To all of the amazing players that I've met out in the events, and I'm not even going to try and list everyone, and to my wife, who's traveled with me to so many events. She's supported me through winning times, through times that I've been devastated by losing. And yeah, I guess thanks to you for having me on for this podcast so that I can tell some stories, maybe give a little back to the community that's given so much to me. And to everyone that watches, please, if you've watched this far, can you leave a comment if I've met you at an event or if you've got anything value from this, because I will read the comments on this. I am so self-absorbed and I love to hear that I might have had some kind of benefit to your experience in your own games.
I'm really interested to read the comments as well, because for me, actually, it's such an inspiration to watch you from outside playing in Yu-Gi-Oh! And now getting the chance to have you here on the podcast. And I'm also interested, I have to say, like, seeing what you will be up to in Star Wars Unlimited in the future. So maybe we do another podcast episode on that when it comes to all the cool tournaments in Star Wars Unlimited.
Yeah.
But I want to really... Yeah, I would love it. Like, I have to start it next year. I told you I will play it too. But very, very big shout out to you making that happen also so quickly. It has really been a joy for me. And maybe we see us at a Star Wars Unlimited tournament or maybe even a YCS in the future.
I look forward to it. Thank you.